Got jealous when my boyfriend's SIL made him a plushie for Christmas and demanded he return it. Then she asked me for coffee to clear the air. I told her if she got divorced, she'd just be another woman in his life, so he broke up with me. I walked into Evan's family Christmas feeling like someone who arrived late to a story everyone else already understood. His brothers had their partners beside them, comfortable and settled, and I tried to blend into the noise even as a quiet edge reminded me that I was the newcomer. Their ease made me feel suspended on the outside, wishing I belonged without knowing how to step inside that circle of familiarity. When Mara handed him the gift, the room shifted. She moved with confidence, holding a wrapped box as if it carried something delicate. Evan opened it, and the blue baby dinosaur appeared in his hands. The stitches were small and careful, the kind of detail you only create when the person matters. Evan lit up and told her it was incredible, and the way he said it lodged somewhere deep inside me. The others watched with interest, but the exchange felt intimate in a way I could not explain. No one else had anything like it. I looked from one brother to the next, waiting for someone to pull out their plushie, but they only admired the one in Evan's hands. Even Caleb, her own husband, smiled with a kind of pride rather than surprise. As if he already knew what she had made and who she had made it for. I whispered to myself a question that burned through my thoughts before I could swallow it back. Why him, when the others loved the same game? Later, I learned she had planned the timing so the other brothers would miss the moment. She wanted Evan to have it in private, with only Caleb standing by. Hearing that sent a faint tremor through me. I tried to tell Evan it seemed unusual, hoping he would understand the knot forming in my chest. He laughed softly and told me I was overthinking. He said Mara had always been close to him. He said it like an explanation that should comfort me, and instead, the word close echoed in my head as something I was not. The feeling stayed with me the rest of the night, heavy and sharp. I tried brushing it off, tried telling myself that I was letting old insecurities flare up again. Still, when we returned home, the thought nagged until I finally asked if he would consider returning it. The question came out fragile, and his expression changed as soon as he realized what I was asking. He told me he would not return a handmade gift and that I was being ridiculous. Something inside me tightened, a quiet shift that felt like the beginning of a crack. The seed settled before I could stop it. It took shape the way small worries do, rooting itself in places where logic should have lived. I knew the feeling was growing, but I could not bring myself to pull it out. I simply held it and tried to pretend it would pass. Much later, when he had fallen asleep beside me, I scrolled through Instagram to distract myself from the restless thoughts. I was not searching for anything in particular. I only needed something quiet to settle my mind. Instead, a photo surfaced from the year before. Evan and Mara stood together, his arm around her, both laughing at something outside the frame. The caption felt colder than the winter night around me. My favorite human. More for daters. The date showed it was posted last year, long before I entered this family. Long before I learned how small a moment could feel when you see it from the outside looking in. The morning after Christmas, I opened Instagram and saw the notification before I even sat up in bed. Mara had posted a new photo of Evan holding the plushie, smiling in a way that made the room around me feel smaller. Her caption read, "For the best man I know." The comments came in fast, full of light jokes and admiration. People said they were adorable, called them the favorite in-law duo, and treated the post like a sweet family moment. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. The words settled on my chest with a weight that was difficult to describe. Something tight and pressing that made me feel like I had been marked as the outsider again. When I showed Evan the post later, he barely looked at it before brushing the moment aside. He said Mara was expressive, said it was part of her personality. His voice held an ease that contrasted the turmoil in my chest. I told him it felt too personal, hoping he would see the discomfort behind my words. Instead, he sighed and asked why I was trying to make something ugly out of nothing. His disappointment reached me faster than any argument could have. I felt it sink under my ribs, a reminder that I kept reacting in ways that pushed him further from understanding me. The family gathered for dinner a few weeks later. The atmosphere was cheerful, full of dishes being passed and half-overlapping conversations. I tried to absorb the warmth of the evening, but the plushie post lingered at the edge of everything. When Nate, Evan's older brother, joked that Mara spoiled Evan more than Caleb, and suggested teasingly that maybe they should give her back, the table erupted into laughter. The sound was effortless for them, but it echoed harshly in me. I smiled because that was what the moment required, yet the smile felt brittle, like something that would splinter if touched. The more time I spent with Evan's family, the more I fought the quiet comparison that rose inside me. They were so effortless together, woven into each other's lives with stories and memories that stretched across years. I tried to match their flow, but every comment, every inside reference made me feel like I was always reacting a few seconds behind. I became overly aware of how often I hesitated before speaking, afraid of revealing how out of place I felt. I turned to my mother and sister for reassurance, hoping they would calm the unease I carried. Instead, their words sharpened everything. My mother told me a woman does not put that much effort into a handmade gift without intention. She said I needed to protect myself. My sister nodded, echoing her certainty. Their warnings coiled inside me like something alive, feeding the doubt I had been trying to quiet since Christmas. I wanted them to tell me I was imagining things, that the fear in my chest was unfounded. But they gave me the opposite. They fed the part of me that already felt threatened, the part shaped by years of watching my mother guard every corner of her marriage. The night settled slowly around the house, and I tried distracting myself with small tasks, hoping the heaviness would fade. Evan walked into the other room to take a phone call, something he often did when he needed to focus. I did not intend to listen, but the tone of his voice carried softly down the hall, low and tense. I heard him say he did not want things to get messy. The word struck me like a drop of cold water. It hung in the air, sharp and heavy with meaning I could not reach. I froze where I stood, listening to the silence that followed before his voice lowered again into something I could not make out. The night held stillness, but inside me, everything began to stir. My thoughts turned over one another, wondering what he meant, wondering who he was speaking to, wondering how the situation had reached a point where the word messy applied at all. That single fragment of conversation pressed into me with the same weight as the caption earlier, sliding into the crack that had formed the day Mara handed him the plushie. The conversation from the night before clung to me until morning, turning heavier each time I replayed that single word in my mind. When Evan finally emerged from the bedroom, I tried to steady my voice enough to ask who he had been talking to. He rubbed his eyes, already tense, as if exhausted by a question I had not yet finished asking. He admitted it was Mara, said she was upset because I kept implying she had crossed a line. I told him it felt inappropriate, hoping he would hear the fear underneath the accusation. His jaw tightened, a small movement with a loud meaning. It told me he was tired of this topic, tired of me pushing against something he considered harmless. I walked away long enough to breathe, but the air in the room felt thick. I thought of how my mother always warned me about women around my partner. She said attention can shift without anyone noticing, that a man often confides in someone before you realize he needed another ear. Her voice, sharpened by years of suspicion, echoed through me. She used to say not to give other women an inch because they take miles. I hated how her tone carried its way into my thoughts, how it molded itself around this situation, and pressed deeper than I wanted it to. I did not want to be filled with her fear. Yet it often felt inherited rather than chosen. As the day went on, I tried distracting myself by cleaning the kitchen, then scrolling through my phone without absorbing anything. My mind kept circling the same point, wondering what Mara and Evan talked about when he said things were getting messy. That was when my phone buzzed with her name. Her message was polite, almost gentle, asking if I would meet her for coffee to talk. The words were simple, but there was a sharpness behind them that pricked at the edge of my nerves. I reread the message several times, unsure if it was a peace offering or a warning. Something about the timing made my chest tighten, as if she had stepped ahead of me in a conversation I had not even agreed to have. I did not respond right away. My hands trembled as I set the phone down and tried to focus on something steady. The house felt too quiet, too full of unanswered questions. I kept thinking of the way Evan defended her, the softness in his voice when he talked about their closeness, and the firmness in his tone when he told me to stop assuming the worst. Every thought layered itself onto the last until the weight inside me shifted from discomfort into something sharper. I found myself wanting to understand the bond they shared, wanting to know why she reached him in ways I did not. Later that afternoon, while looking for lip balm in Evan's drawer, I felt a piece of folded paper slide out. At first, I thought it was a receipt, something disposable. When I opened it, I recognized Mara's handwriting immediately. The note was short and careful, thanking him for always listening and saying it meant more than he knew. The words pulsed on the page, quiet but intimate, the kind of sentiment that suggested conversations I had never been part of. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it was pushing against my ribs. I stared at the ink until the room blurred around the edges. All the doubts from the last few weeks collided at once. The plushie, the caption, the way she called him her favorite, the private conversations, the protective tone he used whenever I questioned her. It all twisted together into one overwhelming thought. She confided in him, and he let her. She thanked him for listening, and he gave her space in his world that I did not know existed. As I stood there holding the note, I felt the shift inside me deepen into something raw. The room felt colder, the silence more pointed. I had not meant to find it, yet there it was, evidence of their closeness written in her handwriting. It made everything I tried to ignore rise back up with a force that made my breath unsteady. I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. When I turned, Evan was standing in the doorway. His eyes went immediately to the paper in my hand. His face changed in an instant, the warmth replaced by something cold and unreadable, as if the note had opened a door neither of us knew how to close. I agreed to meet Mara the next afternoon, though my stomach tightened with every step toward the cafe. The place was quiet, washed in soft light from the large windows that framed the tables. She was already there, sitting with a straight back and a steady expression, her hands folded neatly as if she had rehearsed how calm she wanted to appear. Her eyes were gentle but gave away nothing, and that unreadable quality made the room feel smaller. When I sat down, she greeted me with a polite smile and said she thought it would be best to talk woman to woman. Her tone was even, measured, and the way she held herself made me feel exposed long before our conversation began. Mara started by addressing the plushie, as if clearing the most obvious tension would make everything else easier. She explained that she had planned to make matching ones for all the brothers, but underestimated the time it would take. She said crafting the first one consumed more evenings than she expected, so she decided to give that one to Evan since he was, in her words, her favorite brother-in-law. The word favorite lodged itself in the same place where her caption had settled days earlier. Hearing it spoken aloud made something inside me contract. She said it casually, almost affectionately, as if it were a harmless detail in a long-standing bond. I listened without speaking, trying to quiet the sting of that single word. Mara seemed comfortable with the explanation she offered, but the knot in my chest refused to loosen. The idea that she had saved the one finished plushie for him felt too deliberate, too intimate. I kept searching her face for something revealing, but she remained composed, steady in a way I wished I could mirror. The distance between her calm and my unease felt enormous. The conversation shifted when she lowered her voice and admitted that she and Caleb had been struggling. She spoke carefully, choosing each word as if she feared misinterpretation. She said Evan had been a comforting presence during difficult moments, someone she could talk to without judgment. She clarified that it was not romantic and asked me not to twist that, though the disclaimer did little to settle my breathing. The acknowledgement hit me harder than I expected. The idea that Evan had become her emotional safe place made my pulse tremble. It explained her closeness to him, but it also deepened the insecurity that had already taken root. I felt myself leaning back slightly, as if putting space between us could steady my thoughts. She spoke with a softness that complicated everything. It made her sound vulnerable, not threatening, and that contrast left me uncertain about how to process her words. Evan, being her support, filled me with a mixture of confusion and dread. I wanted to believe her intention was genuine, but the ground under me felt unsteady again. Then Mara offered advice, though it felt more like an assessment made from a distance. She leaned forward and said I was kind but insecure, and that if I did not address those insecurities, I would lose Evan. Her tone remained gentle, yet the message pierced through me. I felt heat rise beneath my skin. The way she phrased it implied she understood my relationship better than I did, as if she had been observing us from a place closer than I ever realized. The tension in me snapped. I heard myself say something I had not planned. I told her that if she ever divorced Caleb, she would not be his sister-in-law anymore, she would just be another woman in Evan's life. The words left my mouth before I could stop them, sharp and too loud in the quiet cafe. For a brief moment, the entire conversation froze. Mara did not move. She stared at me with eyes that shifted from soft to something precise and cutting, the way glass catches light before it breaks. She finally whispered that I would be surprised by what Evan told her. The sentence dropped between us with the same force as a slammed door. It carried implication, knowledge, and a quiet power that made my hands tremble beneath the table. I felt the air thicken around me, heavy with a meaning I could not grasp yet feared all the same. What does he tell her? Evan came to my apartment faster than I expected, the echo of the cafe conversation still heavy in my mind. He pushed the door open with a force that startled me, and the look on his face told me Mara had called him the moment she left. Before I could speak, he demanded to know why I had said that to her. His voice hit the room like a sudden break in the weather. I tried to explain, but the words tangled as they left my mouth. I said I had not meant it the way it sounded. But he cut through my stammer with an accusation that landed hard. He said I had attacked his family again. The emphasis again sent a shock through me. It carried the weight of every conversation we had tried to bury. The air between us changed. I reached for something steady. Something that could make sense of the panic spreading through me. My hand closed around the note from Mara that I had tucked on the counter earlier, and I held it up to him. I asked if she wrote him letters now. He snatched it from my hand and told me it was a thank you note, nothing more. His voice was clipped and sharp, as if defending a boundary I had crossed without permission. I asked why she thanked him for listening, why she confided in him instead of her husband. His eyes flashed with frustration before he told me he did not judge her. The sentence dropped heavily, shifting the room. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. as if everything I had feared was slowly unfolding. My thoughts spiraled faster than I could manage. I asked if he was her confidant now, if he shared things about us, about me. He told me to stop twisting everything. The volume of his voice rose with each word, and I felt my own rising in response. I told him he needed to stop hiding behind her. That accusation lit something between us. The argument split open, each sentence louder than the one before, turning the quiet apartment into a storm neither of us could navigate. We were both grasping at control while losing pieces of ourselves in the process. The panic inside me pushed harder with every breath, while his frustration carved sharper edges into each reply. In that moment, we felt like two people who were drowning, each reaching for the other but pulling further apart. I could not stop the fear from spilling out of me, and he could not stop the anger that had built over the past weeks. It was messy in a way neither of us intended, a collision of hurt, distrust, and things we had left unspoken far too long. The room felt too small for the argument we were trapped in. When he finally stopped shouting, he stepped back as if distance would help him breathe. He grabbed his keys with a finality that told me the conversation was finished. He said he needed space and that he could not do this. The words carried exhaustion more than anger, and for a moment, he looked like someone who had reached the limit of what he could take. I wanted to respond, to pull him back into the room, but my voice failed under the weight of everything we had both said. After he left, a silence filled the space that felt heavier than the argument itself. I sat still, listening to the faint echo of the door closing, realizing how fragile everything had become. The night stretched slowly, pulling me deeper into the uncertainty he left behind. I kept replaying the moment he walked away, telling myself he just needed time, though the fear inside me whispered the opposite. Much later, when the neighborhood had settled into its quiet rhythm, I stepped outside to clear my thoughts. As I passed by Evan's brother's house on my walk, a familiar car caught my eye. Mara's car sat parked near the driveway, its presence illuminated by the streetlight above it. My body reacted before my mind fully processed what I was seeing. My stomach twisted so sharply it felt like I had been pulled backward. I stood there staring, unable to move, the night air filling the spaces where my thoughts should have been. A single question rose through the confusion, trembling and insistent, refusing to let go. Is she with him right now? The morning light did little to calm the unease that had settled over me through the night. When Evan arrived, he looked drained, as if the fight had carved something out of him. He told me he had not seen Mara the night before, said she had been visiting Kale, and that I needed to stop assuming the worst. His tone was steady but fragile, as if he were holding back exhaustion rather than anger. I nodded, yet the image of her car stayed fixed in my mind. I tried telling myself he was telling the truth, that the timing had been unfortunate, but my thoughts kept tightening around the possibility of something I could not prove. The doubt stayed with me, persistent and cold, shadowing every word he said. Later that afternoon, his sister Leah found me lingering near the kitchen during a family gathering. She had always been kind in a quiet way, someone who observed more than she spoke. She touched my arm gently and asked if we could talk. When we stepped into the hallway, she told me she understood how I felt because she had once been an outsider in this family, too. Her voice softened as she explained that the family had its own rhythms, its own history, and that joining it took time. She warned me that if I kept fighting ghosts, I would lose Evan. The way her voice cracked at the end made the words feel heavier. She was not scolding. She was afraid for me. Her empathy should have grounded me, but instead it deepened the ache already growing inside me. After talking with Leah, I went home and sat with my thoughts, hoping for clarity. Instead, curiosity nudged at me until I opened my phone and searched Mara's profile again. I scrolled through her posts, feeling my breath catch when I saw familiar patterns. Evan had left late-night comments, teasing and friendly, sprinkled across the captions. She responded with heart emojis and playful remarks. It was subtle, but the tone between them felt too warm. The kind of warmth built in conversations I had never heard and moments I had never witnessed. My chest tightened as I kept scrolling, every interaction feeding the uneasy suspicion that had been growing since Christmas. I knew I was hurting myself by reading deeper into it, yet I could not bring myself to stop. The weight of everything pushed me to confront Evan again. When he arrived that evening, I stood in front of him with the words already forming in my throat. I told him he was emotionally cheating, my voice wavering between fear and accusation. He stepped back as if the words had physically struck him. He asked if I truly believed that, and said that if I did, then we had a much bigger problem than anything involving Mara. His expression was worn, a mixture of sadness and disbelief, and for a moment, I felt the space between us widen into something familiar, yet unbearable. I felt myself falter under his stare. Every insecurity, every assumption, every moment I had twisted into proof, now pressed against my ribs with the force of a truth I had refused to acknowledge. The room felt unsteady, as if the argument had pushed the ground beneath us apart. Evan said he needed more space and left again, closing the door quietly behind him. The quiet was sharper this time, as if the apartment itself had stopped breathing. Hours passed without movement. I finally picked up my phone and typed a long message, apologizing for everything I had said and everything I had assumed. I told him I did not want to lose him, that I wanted to understand him better, and that I was trying to work through the fear that kept clouding everything. I sent the message and stared at the screen, waiting for the small sign that he was typing back. The notification appeared briefly. Read. Then nothing. The silence that followed felt like an answer in itself. One I was not ready to face yet, though a part of me already understood what it meant. Saturday arrived with a silence that felt deliberate. Evan told me he was going to his brother's house, said it casually, as if the last few days had not strained every part of us. When the door closed behind him, the apartment felt hollow. I tried to sit still, but my thoughts moved restlessly from one fear to another. I pictured Mara there, imagined the two of them talking about me, imagined him finding more comfort in her presence than in mine. The spiral began quietly, then grew into a consuming pull that left me unable to steady my breathing. Every hour that passed carved space for new worries, each one sharper than the last. By midday, my phone rang. Mara's name lit the screen, and for a moment, I considered letting it ring out. Curiosity won. When I answered, her voice came through soft but certain, a tone that felt too composed for the chaos inside me. She told me that I was losing Evan because of myself, not because of her, and she urged me to stop hurting myself. The gentleness of her words carried an honesty I did not want to acknowledge. Her calmness unsettled me, the same way a mirror does when it shows you something you are not ready to see. She was not mocking me. She was not angry. She sounded resigned, almost sympathetic. I pressed the phone to my ear and listened as she spoke, each sentence settling like cold rain. When the call ended, I stared at the wall and felt the weight of her truth gather in my chest. The afternoon stretched long, filled with the quiet ticking of the clock in the living room. I waited for any sign that Evan was coming home, but the hours moved without change. When he finally knocked and stepped inside, his expression gave me no room for hope. His face was blank, drained by days of conflict. He told me he cared about me, that caring had never been the problem, but he could not continue living in a constant cycle of accusation and fear. He said his family was not the enemy, and that I was turning them into one. The words were steady, stripped of anger, which made them even harder to hear. The tiredness in his eyes told me he had been carrying this decision longer than I realized. I tried to hold on to him with words. I reminded him of everything we shared, everything I believed we could still fix. I said I could change, that I understood now how deeply my insecurities had shaped the last few weeks. The plea came out raw, almost painful. He listened, but his expression did not shift. He told me I had promised to change before, that the cycle repeated because neither of us stopped it in time. His voice slipped into a whisper as he said it, as if he knew the sentence would linger long after he left. I watched him take a slow breath, then reach for the door with a finality that felt like winter settling into the room. The sound of the door closing marked the end of something I had tried desperately to hold on to. I stood still, unsure whether to cry, or sit, or shout. Instead, I allowed the silence to stretch until the numbness gave way to an ache that made my chest feel too small for my own heartbeat. The apartment looked unchanged, yet the air felt different, as if the absence of his presence had shifted everything out of place. I drove to see my mother later that evening, thinking I would find comfort in her voice. Instead, when I told her Evan had broken up with me, she leaned back and said it was for the best. She told me he had probably done it, so he would not have anything holding him back from Mara. Her words cut with a sharpness she did not even attempt to soften. I stared at her, realizing the tone I had heard my entire life was the same one that had shaped my fear. The same one that had pushed me deeper into suspicion and jealousy. The realization spread through me slowly, a quiet awakening that drew a line between the past and the consequence sitting in front of me. In that moment, the truth settled with a clarity I had avoided for weeks. The poison did not begin with Mara. It began in the house I grew up in the warnings whispered into my ear long before I ever met Evan, in the fear that taught me closeness could not be trusted. And now it had taken everything from me. In the weeks after the breakup, the quiet around me deepened into something I could finally hear. It was no longer filled with arguments or suspicion, no longer thick with fear that someone else was taking what I cherished. Instead, it exposed the truth I had avoided for a long time. I stopped calling my mother and sister for advice because the words they offered never brought comfort, only warnings shaped by their own wounds. Their voices had followed me into every room of my relationship, turning small moments into imagined betrayals, turning closeness into a threat. I realized their fear had seeped into me over the years, shaping the way I interpreted every gesture, every silence, every absence. Breaking that pattern meant stepping away from the people who had handed it to me. Once the noise of their influence faded, the reflection it left behind was sharper than I expected. I could finally admit the truth without deflecting it. I had destroyed my own relationship. It did not happen in one moment or one argument, but in a slow accumulation of doubt and insecurity that never found release. I let my fears speak louder than Evan's reassurances. I let jealousy interpret his actions before he had the chance to explain them. Each time I felt threatened, I built walls instead of bridges. By the time he tried to pull me back, I had already pushed him too far away. The realization hurt in a way that made it difficult to breathe. But it also brought a clarity I had needed for a long time. It showed me that healing required honesty, not excuses. One evening, when the winter light was beginning to fade, I received a message from Mara. It was short, a single line that asked nothing from me and offered no explanation. She told me she hoped I found peace. The simplicity of it made my eyes sting. I cried, not because she proved herself right, but because I had spent so long imagining her as my enemy when she had never been trying to replace me. She had flaws and complicated emotions of her own, but she was not the shadow I had convinced myself she was. Her message felt like a door closing softly, without anger and without triumph. It allowed me to step forward without dragging resentment behind me. Evan and I never spoke again. There was no final conversation, no attempt to reconnect, just a quiet end that settled between us like a final breath. I had hoped for closure, some moment that would let me untangle the last threads of our relationship, but instead I learned that closure sometimes arrives through absence. With him gone, I stepped into the work that had waited for me long before our relationship ever began. I started therapy, letting myself open the pieces of my childhood that had shaped the way I loved. I talked about the fear that followed me into every room, the belief that affection was fragile, the instinct to guard what mattered so fiercely that I ended up crushing it. Each session felt like peeling away layers I had worn without question. As the days grew into weeks, I found myself rebuilding something steadier. I took long walks in the evening, letting the air clear my thoughts. I learned to recognize when fear was trying to take the wheel, when my mind was reaching for old patterns that no longer served me. It was not easy, and it was not quick, but it was honest. Somewhere in that process, I realized the story I had been living through was no longer about Evan or Mara or the plushie or the arguments. It had become about the woman I was becoming. The woman I wanted to be. Someone who could hold love without gripping it too tightly. In the final moment of this journey, I understood that the ending I feared most was the one I needed. For the first time, the story did not end with him. It ended with me choosing to fix the version of myself I had grown afraid of becoming. It ended with a quiet hope, a promise that my next chapter would be built on trust rather than fear. If you connected with this story, share it with someone who may see themselves in these moments. Follow the channel for more stories that explore the parts of us we often hide, the parts that still long to heal, and the parts that remind us we are never alone in our struggles.